My name is Harold Jennings. I'm 61 years old, a retired carpenter, and for the past 30 years, I've lived in the same cedar cabin on the edge of Dayton, Ohio. I built it with my own hands back when my knuckles didn't ache and my back still bent without protest. My late wife, Ellen, planted the spruce tree out front the year Daniel was born. Every December, we strung it with red bulbs and white lights, a beacon for Christmas Eve when neighbors would gather in the yard with mugs of cider. This year, as I unpacked the dusty box of ornaments, the silence was louder than any carol. The spruce tree had grown tall, its branches heavy. I strung the lights myself, slower than I once did, but steady. When I stepped back, the glow seemed smaller somehow, as though it wasn't enough to chase off the cold. I'd been calling Daniel, my only son, all week. The first time he answered, his voice was clipped, distracted. "We'll talk later, Dad," he'd said before hanging up. The next 3 calls went straight to voicemail. So when my neighbor, Mrs. Fletcher, stopped by with a tin of cookies, she asked gently, "Will Daniel be here this Christmas?" I smiled as best I could. He always comes home. But doubt crept in as I watched her walk back across the snowy yard. The cabin felt smaller. The ornaments in my hand shook a little. That night, I placed Ellen's old nativity set on the mantel. One of the shepherds was missing an arm, but she always said it gave him character. I whispered to the empty room, "He'll come. He has to." Still, something gnawed at me. Daniel had been distant for months, Sophie even colder. And in the stillness of that cabin, with the tree glowing faintly against the frost, I felt the first crack of a truth I didn't want to face. This Christmas might be the first I'd spend without my family. 2 days before Christmas, I drove into town with a basket of firewood tied down in the truck bed. Daniel had been ignoring my calls, but I figured showing up at his new house with a gift might soften things. At the very least, I'd see my granddaughter, Emily. Snow was falling light, the streets glowing with wreaths and string lights. Daniel's new place sat on a cul-de-sac, a freshly built brick home with wide windows. It looked nothing like the cabin Ellen and I had built, polished, cold, and far too quiet for Christmas. I parked at the curb. As I stepped out, I heard Sophie's voice carry through the cracked window above the garage. I froze, half hidden behind my truck. "Don't worry," she was saying. "He won't be in our way much longer. The bank's got the paperwork ready. Once the loan clears, that old shack is gone. By Christmas, we'll be celebrating here, no strings attached." A male voice, Daniel's, murmured something I couldn't make out. Sophie laughed, sharp as glass. "Harold will get over it. He's just an old man clinging to memories. He doesn't belong in a real home anymore. Not with us." My breath fogged in the air. My chest tightened until I thought my ribs might crack. The door opened suddenly, and Sophie stepped out with a bag of trash. She startled when she saw me, then quickly smoothed her face into a bright smile. "Harold, what a surprise. Daniel's busy with work things. Maybe another time." I stared at her, searching her eyes for some hint of kindness. There was none. "I brought wood," I said simply, holding up the basket. She waved a hand dismissively. "Oh, we don't need that anymore. We've got central heating." The bag hit the bottom of the trash bin with a thud. She closed the lid, glanced back once, then disappeared inside without another word. I stood there in the falling snow, basket heavy in my arms, realizing for the first time that my son and his wife weren't just forgetting me. They were planning to erase me. That night, I couldn't sleep. Sophie's words kept circling my mind, echoing through the rafters of the cabin. "He doesn't belong in a real home anymore." By morning, I decided I wasn't going to let whispers and shadows gnaw at me. I drove back to Daniel's house, this time knocking hard enough to rattle the wreath on their front door. Daniel answered, hair tousled, phone still in his hand. He blinked, surprised. "Dad? You should have called." "I did," I said. "You didn't answer." Before he could respond, Sophie appeared over his shoulder, already dressed, lips pressed in a line. "Harold, we're busy. Christmas prep." I stepped inside before she could stop me. The living room gleamed. New leather couches, polished floors, stockings hung without a speck of dust. Not one of them had my name. "Busy?" I asked. "Too busy to tell me you're planning to sell my home out from under me?" Daniel froze. Sophie's eyes flickered, then narrowed. "You must have misunderstood something." "I heard you," I said, voice low but steady. "He won't be in our way much longer. That's what you told the bank." Daniel rubbed his temples. "Dad, it's complicated. The cabin, it's old, it needs work. We thought maybe—" "We, or Sophie," I cut in. Silence stretched. Sophie crossed her arms. "You're twisting things. Daniel's just being practical. It's not healthy for you to live out there alone. We're offering you dignity, a chance to move on." "By stealing my house?" I asked. Her smile turned brittle. "By making sure you're not a burden." The word landed like a slap. Burden. After decades of building, saving, raising, I looked at Daniel, waiting for him to defend me. His mouth opened, then closed again. He stared at the floor. The silence said more than words ever could. Finally, Sophie stepped forward, hand on the door. "You should go, Harold. We'll talk after the holidays. Right now, you're upsetting the family." I walked out into the snow, the door shutting softly behind me. And for the first time in my life, I wondered if I still had a son at all. The snow crunched under my boots as I trudged back to the cabin. My chest felt hollow, but my mind buzzed with questions. Sophie's tone hadn't been defensive. It had been rehearsed, like she'd been waiting for me to confront her. That evening, I got a knock on my door. It was Martha Reynolds, my neighbor from across the ridge. She was bundled in a thick parka, cheeks red from the cold. "Harold," she said, voice low. "I wasn't sure if I should come, but I thought you ought to know." She pulled an envelope from her coat. Inside was a notice from the county clerk's office addressed to me, though it had never reached my mailbox. It was a notice of mortgage transfer. My name was there, typed neat as day, but the signature at the bottom, supposedly mine, wasn't my handwriting. Not even close. I looked up at Martha, my throat tightening. "Where did you get this?" She hesitated. "My cousin works at the clerk's office. Said she thought it was strange considering she'd seen you at church bragging about owning that cabin outright. So she copied it for me." I set the paper on the table. My hands shook, not from age but from fury. "They forged my name," I whispered. Martha nodded grimly. "Looks like someone took out a second mortgage against the property. If you default, the bank owns it. And with the terms they filed," she shook her head, "you wouldn't stand a chance." The air inside the cabin felt colder than the storm outside. I imagined Sophie's polished smile, Daniel's silence, and the way they'd both looked at me like I was already gone. "They're trying to bleed me out," I said. Martha's eyes softened. "Harold, you need help. Don't let pride keep you from fighting this. You've still got friends." I walked her to the door, my mind racing. Friends or not, this was my battle. But one thing was certain. The betrayal wasn't a whisper anymore. It was written in ink, filed at the courthouse and sitting on my kitchen table like a death warrant. And if Sophie and Daniel thought I'd go quietly, they didn't know me at all. Christmas Eve morning, the ridge was silent except for the windsaw scraping across the snow. I drove down to town for supplies, needing bread and kerosene. When I returned, the key wouldn't fit my front door. I tried again, twisting hard. Nothing. Someone had changed the locks. The realization struck like a hammer. My own cabin, my home for 30 years, was no longer mine, at least not by force of key. I circled the cabin, checking windows. Each one had new screws in the frames. Sophie hadn't wasted time. I pounded on the door, the sound echoing across the trees. No answer. The place looked untouched, but I could almost feel her fingerprints on everything. Finally, I gave up and drove back to Daniel's, heart thudding. The driveway was jammed with cars. Laughter spilled from inside. A family gathering, my family, without me. I stood at the window long enough to see Daniel carving a ham at the head of the table. Sophie beside him, radiant. My grandchildren passing plates, giggling. A Norman Rockwell Christmas scene, except the patriarch was outside in the snow, staring in like a stranger. I knocked. Hard, heads turned. Daniel came to the door, cracked it just wide enough to speak. "Dad, this isn't a good time," he said, eyes darting back to Sophie. I swallowed. My key doesn't work. Someone changed the locks. He hesitated. Sophie appeared behind him, voice sharp. "We had to secure the property. You've been confused lately. We're handling things for your own good." "For my own good?" My voice shook. "Leaving me out in the cold on Christmas Eve?" Her eyes narrowed. "Don't make this dramatic. You have options. Assisted living, smaller apartments. We can't keep carrying your burden forever." The words tore through me. Burden, confused, for my own good. Behind them, my grandchildren peered around the corner. One whispered, "Why is Grandpa outside?" Sophie closed the door before I could answer. I stood there for a full minute, snow melting on my coat, before walking back to my truck. I spent Christmas Eve sitting on a diner stool, eating cold meatloaf while the waitress hummed carols under flickering lights. For the first time in my life, I truly felt like I had no home. I woke up in that diner booth, stiff from sleeping half-sitting, the neon lights still buzzing overhead. It was Christmas morning, and the few stragglers left looked as tired as I felt. The waitress, Linda, set down a steaming cup of coffee. "On the house," she said softly. "Merry Christmas, Harold." Her kindness was a spark in the dark. I nodded, but inside something hardened. I had been humiliated, locked out, cast aside like an unwanted guest at my own family's table. But one thought rose above the humiliation. This isn't over. After breakfast, I drove into town and parked outside the VFW hall. Old habits die hard. When the world crumbles, you look for the men who once had your back. Inside, the place smelled of coffee and wood polish. There sat Carl Jennings, my former sergeant, now hunched with age but sharp-eyed as ever. He spotted me and raised a brow. "Well, if it isn't Corporal Whitaker, you look like you've been through hell." I told him everything. The whispers, the forged papers, the new locks. His face went stone still. "They stole your house?" "They're trying." Sophie and Daniel filed papers with my forged signature. Carl leaned back. "Paper trails leave footprints. Banks, clerks, signatures. They all leave proof. Don't let shame fool you into silence. You've still got fight in you." Something clicked inside me. Proof, evidence. I wasn't crazy and I wasn't powerless. If they thought age made me weak, they had forgotten I'd spent years in the Marines tracking every line, every order, every detail. I knew how to build a case. I left the hall with Carl's words ringing in my ears. Snow bit at my cheeks, but for the first time in weeks, I felt heat in my chest. This wasn't about just surviving. This was about reclaiming what was mine, about standing tall in the face of betrayal. I looked back at the cabin's dark silhouette across the ridge and swore under my breath. They wanted a fight. They've got one. I spent Christmas night at the VFW hall, jotting notes in an old green ledger Carl dug out from a cabinet. "Best tool you'll ever have," he said. "Paper doesn't lie." I listed everything. Dates Sophie had called the bank, the notice Martha gave me, the changed locks, even Daniel's silence at the door. Each detail was a nail, and I was building a coffin for their scheme. The first step was the county clerk's office. Once it reopened after the holidays, I'd request certified copies of every document tied to my property. If my signature was forged, a handwriting expert could prove it. The second step was the bank. I still had my old Marine buddy, James "Red" Hanley, who worked security there. I'd reach out quietly, ask him to pull the file. Banks recorded phone calls, and Sophie's sweet voice convincing them I'd agreed to new terms would be damning. Third step, backup. Carl reminded me no man wins a war alone. He gave me a short list of names, old contacts who could help. One was a retired county attorney, another a journalist with the Denver Post. You hit from 3 sides at once, legal, financial, and public, and they won't know where to run, Carl said. I nodded, every nerve alive again. The fog of betrayal was lifting, replaced by clarity. But I needed bait, something to lure Sophie and Daniel into exposing themselves further. That's when I remembered the voice recorder I used for hunting trips, small enough to hide in a pocket. If I pressed them about the house, they'd slip. Greedy people always do. By the time the clock struck midnight, I had a full battle plan written across 6 pages of the ledger. It wasn't revenge for the sake of it. It was justice. I closed the book, set my jaw, and whispered, "You stole Christmas from me. Now I'll take everything you tried to steal back, with interest." The county clerk's office smelled like paper and disinfectant, a steady hum of fluorescent lights and automatic doors. I waited in line with a man buying a hunting license and a woman holding a stack of birth certificates. When my turn came, I asked, steady as I could, for everything filed against my property in the last 6 months. The clerk, a young fellow with a nose ring and a patience I envied, pulled a heavy manila folder from a cabinet and slid it across the counter. "Certified copies," he said, "stamped and sealed." I paid in cash and walked back out into the cold with the folder clutched to my chest like a small life preserver. At the diner table, I opened it. Mortgage transfer, notice of lien, a second mortgage in staggering print. And there it was, my name at the bottom of a signature line. The loops wrong, the pressure inconsistent. I'd signed my name 1,000 times. I knew the way my hand turned. This wasn't mine. Someone had traced an imitation, careful and mechanical. The certified stamp made it official enough to scare a man. My hands were shaking, but I hadn't finished. I'd promised Red I'd be discreet. So I drove across town and slipped into the bank where he worked security. He met me behind the cameras, eyes the color of old pennies, and motioned me into a back room. "You look hollow, Harold. Let's see what kind of trouble your family's been cooking up," he said, half joke, half warning. He typed, called, and after a few hurried words and a secure handshake, he came back with a printout and a promise. "They keep recordings," he said. "Customer service keeps phone logs. If Sophie called and said you agreed, it would be in there." He slid the page across. A list of timestamps, an operator's note. One call flagged where an account rep wrote, "Caller verified. Mr. H. Moore authorized new mortgage terms." Except the voice wasn't mine. It had Sophie's careful cadence, those tiny huffs she makes when she's lying. Red pulled up the audio and pressed play. "Listen." A woman's voice, warm, practiced, spoke my name and said words she'd never make me say. The rep's voice followed, polite and robotic. Verified per security questions. 2 minutes of crisp-sorting paper and an electronic signature stamped into my life like a brand. That was physical evidence #1, certified county copies showing a lien that listed my name, and a bank recording timestamp that lined up with the paperwork. Together, they were a story of someone who hadn't just plotted in whispers. They'd gotten clerks and servers to accept it. I paid Red for his trouble with cash and a promise. "Don't call the front desk. Let me breathe. I'll get you what you need." He nodded and shoved the printouts into a manila envelope for me. Back at the cabin, I made copies, dozens, then dozens more, using the little copier at the courthouse annex. Certified copies of certified copies, sealed with the clerk's stamp again where possible. I put one folder with Marlene's will and another with the bank audio into my coat. I tucked the old hunting recorder into my shirt pocket, the tiny red light ready to blink. There was one thing on the list that made me swallow hard. A scheduled notice. If I read it right, a trustee's sale was set for 2 weeks from that morning. 2 weeks. The ink on the page looked ordinary enough, but its meaning was alarm. Foreclosure could strip me out of my home before I could file anything. I slid the paper into the stack and felt the cold bite of time. 2 weeks to stop them. 2 weeks to make everyone who'd laughed at me wish they'd listened. I closed the folder, zipped my coat, and stepped out into the bright, indifferent winter sun. A man with a plan and the clock counting down. The trustee's sale date is only 2 weeks away. 2 nights later, I drove to Daniel's house, recorder tucked in my shirt pocket, the certified copies in a neat folder under my arm. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight the leather squeaked. The lights inside glowed warm against the snow. They were having leftovers, laughing like Christmas had never ended. I knocked once. Sophie opened the door, her smile polished and thin. "Harold." What a surprise. Daniel hovered behind her, already frowning. "Dad, what's going on?" I stepped in without asking. "We need to talk. Now." They exchanged a look but didn't stop me. I spread the documents across their kitchen table, smoothing them flat. "Care to explain why the county clerk has my signature on a mortgage I never signed?" Sophie's face didn't falter. If anything, she tilted her head like a teacher correcting a child. "You must be confused. We talked about this months ago. You agreed it was time to leverage the property for improvements." "Improvements?" I barked. "You mean your new SUV in the driveway? Or the vacation photos from Maui you posted on Facebook?" Daniel rubbed his forehead. "Dad, calm down." "No," I snapped. "Don't tell me to calm down when you let her do this. You sat by while Sophie forged my name and told the bank I'd approved it." His eyes widened. "Dad, that's not—" "Don't bother," I cut in, sliding the printout of the bank call toward him. "That's Sophie's voice, not mine. Your own wife pretending to be me, answering my security questions." The color drained from his face. Sophie's jaw tightened. "You don't know what you're talking about. Those papers are legal. You can't just barge in here accusing us." I leaned closer, voice low, steady. "I know exactly what I'm talking about. I have certified copies, audio evidence, and a neighbor who saw the filings before I ever did. That's enough to bury both of you." For the first time, Sophie's smile cracked. She glanced at Daniel, then back at me, her voice sharpened to a whisper. You were never supposed to find out this soon. Silence. The room shrank around us. Daniel's lips parted, but no words came. I slid the recorder deeper into my pocket, the tiny red light blinking, catching every word. You think age makes me blind, I said. But I see everything, and now the whole world will too. Their kitchen, once warm and staged, felt like a courtroom. And for the first time in months, the jury wasn't stacked against me. The next morning, my phone buzzed before dawn. A voicemail. Sophie's voice, calm but with steel underneath. Harold, you're making a mistake. If you push this, you'll regret it. People will believe I was just trying to protect you. They'll see you as a confused old man. And once the courts hear that, you'll lose everything. Think carefully. The message ended with the soft click of confidence. The kind of confidence that comes from someone used to winning. By noon, another envelope showed up at my door. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with block letters scrawled in black marker. Drop it or lose everything. I sat at the kitchen table staring at it until the wind rattled the window. Fear tried to claw its way up my throat, but anger buried it. They wanted to scare me into silence. They didn't realize they'd just given me proof of intimidation. That evening, I drove into town to meet with James Hanley, red again. He handed me a thumb drive with a quiet nod. Pulled the call audio for you. It's yours now. Chain of custody intact. I thanked him, tucking it into the ledger. One more nail. As I walked out, a car pulled up beside me. A young man stepped out, my grandson, Ethan. 16, lanky, his mother's eyes but my stubborn chin. Grandpa, he said, looking around nervously. I heard Mom and Dad talking. They said you're trying to ruin them. I braced myself. And what do you think? He bit his lip. I think they're lying. I saw the papers on Mom's desk. Your name was traced, like when I try to copy signatures at school. It didn't look real. For the first time in days, my chest loosened. You're the only one who believes me. Ethan pulled out his phone. I recorded them talking last night. Mom said, if Harold goes to the bank, we're done. Dad told her to relax, said you'd never fight back. He handed me the phone. I can send you the clip. That was the moment the tide shifted. Not because of the clip alone, but because I wasn't alone anymore. My own blood stood beside me, quiet but firm. I put a hand on his shoulder. Ethan, this is dangerous. You shouldn't. I'm not scared, he said. They can lie to everyone else, but not to me. Tell me what to do. The wind bit at us as we stood in that parking lot. But for the first time in weeks, I felt warmth. Sophie and Daniel thought they'd isolated me. Instead, they'd driven my grandson straight into my corner. 2 days later, Martha came knocking again, her parka dusted with snow. She didn't waste time with greetings. Harold, you need to see this. She handed me a small spiral-bound notebook, its cover bent and stained. Found it in the recycling bin outside your son's house. Sophie must have tossed it, but she wasn't careful. Inside were pages of notes written in Sophie's neat handwriting. Phone numbers, bank names, bullet points like transfer funds to Cayman account, and Harold's memory issues equal sign leverage for court. I turned the pages slowly, my stomach tightening. On one page, Charo, circled twice in red ink, were the words, Trustees sale equal sign freedom. Play victim card if needed. It wasn't just greed. It was strategy. She'd been planning my downfall step by step, even rehearsing how to paint me as a senile old man when I fought back. Martha's voice cut through my thoughts. I didn't read it all, but there's enough here to show intent. Handwriting, dates, even mentions of the bank calls. This is gold. That notebook was physical evidence hashed too. Stronger than copies or recordings. It was her own words, her own hand. Later that night, Ethan slipped into the cabin again, eyes wide with excitement. "Grandpa, I've got more." He pulled up his phone and showed me a series of photos he'd snapped. His mom on the phone with bank papers spread across the kitchen, his dad signing something with a shaky hand, Sophie whispering, "Just one more week, and it's ours." The boy had risked everything to capture those moments, and my throat tightened with pride and worry. When I tucked the notebook into my ledger beside the certified copies, the thumb drive, and Ethan's recordings, the pile felt heavier than any rifle I'd ever carried. It was a weapon, proof no one could ignore. But the pressure was mounting on the other side, too. That night, Daniel showed up at my cabin. He didn't knock, just barged in, face pale, hands trembling. "Dad," he said, voice breaking, "stop this, please. Sophie's unraveling. She thinks you're working with the cops. She's snapping at me, at the kids. You're pushing her too far." I looked him dead in the eye. "I'm not pushing her anywhere. She dug this grave herself." He swallowed, fists clenching. "If you go through with this, she'll destroy you. She'll drag your name through the mud. Don't make me choose between you and her." I stared at my son, torn in half by his own cowardice, and felt something settle deep in my bones. "You already chose, Daniel. Now live with it." He left, slamming the door so hard the cabin shook. And I realized with chilling clarity, they were cracking, their control was slipping, their lies tangling around them. The next move was mine, and it would be the last one. The courthouse smelled of pine cleaner and paper, its halls echoing with the shuffle of boots on tile. I stood before the clerk with my ledger tucked under my arm and Ethan at my side, his chin high, braver than any 16-year-old should have to be. I laid the stack on the counter, certified copies, the bank audio on a thumb drive, Sophie's notebook, Ethan's photos. "This," I told the clerk, "is evidence of fraud, forgery, and elder abuse." She blinked, then called a deputy. Within an hour, I was sitting with the county prosecutor, laying it all out piece by piece. Every signature, every phone call, every scrap of Sophie's handwriting. The prosecutor didn't interrupt, just nodded grimly, tapping notes. When I finished, she said, "Mr. Moore, this is more than enough to halt the trustee's sale. We'll also file criminal charges." 2 days later, sheriff's deputies knocked on Daniel's door. I watched from across the street as Sophie screamed at them, her face blotched red, while they cuffed her hands behind her back. Daniel stood frozen, the kids crying in the hallway. "Forgery, fraud, conspiracy," one deputy read as he led her past the Christmas wreath still hanging on the door. "You have the right to remain silent." The neighbors gathered, whispering, cameras out. Sophie's perfect smile was gone, replaced by twisted rage as she spotted me across the snow. "You'll regret this, Harold," she shouted, but her voice cracked. She knew it was over. The story hit the local paper the next morning. Daughter-in-law charged in property fraud scheme against elder relative. The article detailed the forged mortgage, the bank calls, the notebook that spelled out her plan. Daniel's name was included too, under investigation for complicity. Calls poured in. Old friends, neighbors, even church members I hadn't seen in years. They weren't whispering anymore. They were offering rides, dinners, prayers. And Ethan, my boy, stood taller than ever, his recording sealing the case. "You did the right thing, Grandpa," he told me, "even if it's hard." I looked at him, pride flooding through me. "No, son, we did the right thing." On the day the judge signed the order voiding the fraudulent mortgage, I stood outside the courthouse with my ledger in one hand and the winter sun on my face. My cabin was mine again. My dignity was mine again. And Sophie? She would spend her next Christmas behind bars, her empire of lies burned to ash. For once, justice didn't whisper. It roared.